Melissa Kane is chair of the Connecticut Against Gun Violence Board. It's a very important job, but also typical of her long career in public service. Melissa formerly co-chaired the Downtown Plan Implementation Committee. Before that, she was on the Westport RTM and was Westport's third selectwoman. She's also on the State Legislative Gun Violence Commission. So, Melissa, welcome to 06880, the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here to talk with you, Dan. I'm excited.
It's a very important subject. And, here we are in a town a few miles from Sandy Hook, in a country that has been racked by gun violence from coast to coast. Yeah. And clearly, Connecticut Against Gun Violence is an important organization. Can you tell us about it?
Sure, I'd love to. And I think we're important for a number of reasons. So we've been around for about 30 years, recognizing when gun violence prevention legislation was actually being passed in the 90s, the Brady Act, that legislation needed to be passed at the state level. Our founders kind of understood that it was important to safeguard at the state level and started this organization. Since then, we've obviously grown. We are one of the 3 states in the country rated as an A in gun violence prevention, one of the 3 states with the lowest gun violence numbers in the country. We're proud of that, but there's still far too much gun violence. There's far too much death from firearms, far too much injury from firearms, and there are communities that are underrepresented. There's community-level gun violence that goes on every day, really under the radar of people who are aware of the mass shootings that are going on in this country and the suicides that are happening in this country. And we as an organization aim to legislate to try and solve for, as well as educate on all of those things. So I think what I'm proud of about the organization is that we've had an effect in the state, but also that we serve as a model for other states in the type of work that they're doing. Especially now, we're entering a time where I fear that the work that was just getting started, that the Biden administration had created a National Office of Gun Violence Prevention that's most definitely going to be shuttered, that work will really need to be done at the state level, continue to be done, and really need to safeguard, our liberties, like the right to live without guns hurting us at the state level.
So successes on the Connecticut state level?
Oh, I mean, we've had many. To name a few that are certainly very important and I think resonant in Connecticut. Starting in 2019, we passed Ethan's Law, along with Kristen and Mike Song, the parents of Ethan Song, who was killed by a handgun that was left in a Tupperware box in his friend's house. And that is a law for secure storage. We updated that law with the governor's an act concerning gun violence in 2023. And so now in the state of Connecticut, if you have a gun and it's not on your person, it needs to be securely stored. Period, the end. That's the law. We were obviously very involved in helping to pass that legislation and to educate about that legislation. And one of the things that I'm pleased about being a Westporter is that Westport, so we have a CAGV Youth Council, and they work with Youth Demand Action and the Newtown Action Alliance Junior Alliance, and we have worked very hard reaching out, students directly reaching out to their school boards and their school administrations to say, hey, people need to know about this law. It's really important when you talk about safety from people who potentially want to do harm to themselves or others. It's really important for families to know that it is illegal to have guns that aren't locked up. And Westport is one of the towns where students lobbied Tom Scarice, and he included in his letter to families, I believe it was in June, a link to the law and talked about the importance of locking up guns. So that's one of the things that feels close to home.
Sure.
Something we passed that's certainly important, and that's important to educate about. I mean, look, we have an assault weapons ban, we have a ghost gun ban, and a bump stock ban. All of those are being challenged continually by the NRA or the CCDL or the National Sports NSSF, which is an arm of the NFL, NFL, NRA, not the NFL. We love the NFL,
and is located in Newtown.
It was located until very recently in Newtown. I think they've actually moved recently, but we as an organization have been members of amicus briefs supporting the state legislation, along with national organizations like Giffords and Brady. And March for Our Lives to help uphold our laws.
So how'd you get involved?
That's a great question. You know, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I had a new baby when my son was born in 1999, and there was a lot of news at the time about the and they called it collateral damage. I'll never forget that. But there were a lot of children being shot as a result of drive-by shootings in cities, specifically in Chicago. There was a lot. It was just really, something that the news was covering, and it was just so horrifying to me that a child could be in a stroller and shot because they happened to be in the wrong place in the wrong time. And so I started just donating. I started getting involved and learning about Brady and donating to Brady. And I went to the Million Mom March, which I think was in 2000, maybe it was 99. No, I think it was one of those years, which was focused on gun violence. And it just kind of became something that I cared about. And obviously, you know me, there are a lot of things I care about, and I believe in sort of speaking out and taking action when you care about things. It was sort of always there and on the back burner. And then I got involved in local government, and Sandy Hook happened. And I was a member, along with a couple of other members of the RTM, where we, I think we did a sense of the meeting resolution to request that the state try and ban certain weapons and in response to Sandy Hook. And as I did that, I got involved with Connecticut Against Gun Violence.
Did it pass the RTM?
Yes, it did. Absolutely. There was full support for it. Yeah. I mean, this is a town that stands up for what it believes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you, in your work, obviously you come up against people who are supporters of guns.
Sure.
Not gun violence, but supporters of guns. And are you able to have dialogues with them and see where they're coming from?
Absolutely.
And
we
have
have
you
to.
evolved or learned?
Well, so
that
I hope,
side?
yeah, sure. So I hope in everything in my life, I'm constantly evolving. If you stop evolving, not good. Yes. So we are Connecticut Against Gun Violence, not Connecticut Against Guns. I have friends who are hunters. I have friends who, like to target shoot. I have shotguns with them to understand, pistols and long guns. I believe, and I think I can say pretty confidently that the vast majority of gun owners in this country are legal gun owners who want to be safe gun owners. And I mean, as the records show, the vast majority of Americans want safe storage, want background checks, want ERPO laws, that's extreme risk protection order laws. We have a wonderful one in Connecticut that we updated a couple of years ago. Want to have the legislation in place and the safeguards in place so that people who shouldn't access guns can't access them. That's really what we're talking about. And CAGV for years really focused on access. I think if you're a legal gun owner, and what's interesting is that the NRA for years talked about safe storage.
That's how they started.
That's how they started. And there's sort of a cynicism that's sort of seeped into them over the past 20, 30 years and the way they've, marketed a culture war that even the idea of safe storage, even the idea of saying it should be illegal not to have to lock up your guns is not something that they'll agree to because, and this is really sad, when guns are stolen from suburban areas, from rural areas, there's proof of this. They wind up in urban gun crimes. The NRA is an organization that is about selling a product, and when people's guns are stolen, they're scared, and what do? They buy more guns. So that's really sad, and it's really, really, really sad when you think about it. Sorry, I don't remember the question.
No, I was just asking about how you deal with people on the other side.
So we have members of our organization who are gun owners who believe that Connecticut should be safe from gun violence. I started to talk a little earlier about the sort of scourge of community gun violence, which is the violence that takes place in mostly urban centers, mostly areas where Black and brown folks are more affected. And it's really part of, a system of, the root causes of it are certainly rooted in systemic racism and practices that, like redlining, which happened in a lot of the cities and a lot of the communities in our state and our country, created areas and circumstances under which gun violence, cycles of poverty, cycles of violence continue. And we really have spent our focus, have focused much more specifically on how do we address community level gun violence in Connecticut. So it wasn't just about that. I know where I got to this. I was talking about access. It's not just about dealing with access through legislation. It's about getting funding to the groups on the ground in the communities that are most affected by gun violence.
So this is perhaps the most cynical question I've ever asked.
Okay.
We are a community that, is not really affected by gun violence. So what's in it for Westporters?
Oh, I don't know how you can say that. Suicide is almost 2/3 of all of the gun deaths in this country. We've had teen suicide in this town. We've had adult suicide in this town. I think what's in it is keeping people safe. It's saying we want to live in a community where we're not scared when we walk down the street and where we don't fear for our loved ones' lives. I think that should be sort of evident to anybody in this country. Yes, there are communities where gun violence is more prevalent, and we need to do what we can to address the root causes and look at prevention. But I'd also say that growing up today, if we look at kids, if we look at these schools, growing up today, and I know you'll agree with me, is a hell of a lot more difficult than growing up when we did. I don't know that I could do it. And there's so much pressure on these kids in so many ways. And so the idea of adding guns into an already really difficult time in someone's life is just, I don't want that ever to happen. We've been extraordinarily lucky in Westport. I don't even want to say it. I don't want to answer this question because I want it to just remain the way it is.
Do you have any sense of how many guns are in Westport?
Oh, not off the top of my head. I remember discussing that with Fody, with Chief Gaskinas over the years. I would not dare to say a number.
No, I think I can't remember what the number is.
It's more than people think. It is much more than you think. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you work as board chair.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Okay.
What is there
that's
a typical day or?
Oh, well, so over the past year, I was the interim executive director, which is a very different job than being board chair. I've been board chair for over 7 years now, almost 8 years now. So it's pretty much the same as with any not-for-profit organization. The board is responsible, and sometimes it's hard to get board members to understand this, but especially when people come in as activists, because we are there because we believe that we need to help end gun violence, and there are many ways to do that, and the many ways where members of our boards, their talents can be used and are important. But one of the main roles of any board member is the fiduciary health and the governance of an organization. So I focus a lot on that. We need to raise money. CAGV is, and a number of organizations are like that. We're two organizations. We're a C4, which is a nonprofit that is we are a lobbying organization. Donations aren't tax deductible. We also have a C3, the Connecticut Against Gun Violence Education Fund, which it's a C3, 501c3, so it is tax deductible, and that's our education fund. We do a lot of our work on gun violence education out of that. So for the C4, something like 95% of all of our funding comes from individual donors. So we do a lot of
What's the budget?
$600,000 for both
Not
organizations. Not a lot. No, we punch way higher than our weight class. We have a really small and scrappy and excellent staff. Our new executive director, a wonderful gentleman by the name of Earl Bloodworth, who is from Connecticut originally, grew up in New Haven, and has worked extensively in reentry, is just amazing. We're thrilled, and we have another new staff member we're thrilled about working on.
And you're thrilled not to be the interim director anymore.
Oh, I'm really happy. It was a lot. And by the way, when you're the ED and the board chair, you realize how different they are.
Yeah.
And what your focus is very different.
Challenges. What are the challenges?
Well,
fundraising is one, I'm sure.
Well, but I was going to say, so I want to know how to answer that question. The challenges as a board director or the challenges for gun violence prevention, or both?
Both.
Okay. So the challenges, sure, as a board board chair, is making sure that we have a diverse and effective board, and continuing always to cultivate that board. We are always looking for new interested board members. I put a plug in for that. And we have amazing boards. We have two boards, the C3 and the C4. But you don't want to get into all the details of that. But terrific board members, but we're always looking to expand our board. Obviously, the fiduciary health of the organization, making sure that we raise the money we want to raise, making sure that our governance is appropriate, that we are looking at diversity and equity in the things that we are doing, making sure that the organization is well run. For the future of gun violence prevention, when you asked, what are the challenges, the biggest challenge is making sure that one of the things we're focused on in this legislative session is making sure that the funding that we've helped secure that's going towards organizations on the ground in the communities that are most affected by gun violence continue to get funding. So some legislation that we helped pass over the last 3-4 years, the governor put in his budget, the last biennium, 23-24, I think $3.9 million. We are hoping that the money was funded through the Department of, or I should say, administered through the Department of Public Health. And I won't get too into the weeds because it's super confusing, but the DPH has asked for that same flat amount, and we are really hoping that it winds up in the governor's budget. I mean, this is no time to be losing funding when organizations that we're working with are losing, ARPA funding, and when we're sure that federal funding is really going to dry up, we want to make sure that state funding stays where it needs to be, not for us, but for the organizations that we work with.
You mentioned Connecticut being in the top 3 states in terms of safety and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Why? What makes Connecticut so good?
Because of the laws we passed.
But why were the laws passed?
Because we've had very, very active outreach and organizers and spent years and years and years creating a reputation and working super closely with our legislators and our executive branch to make sure that these laws get passed. I mean, it's full time out there. We do everything from coming up with a. We work with professional lobbyists, and we come up with a list of legislative priorities every year. And we work very closely with legislators who become champions. Jonathan Steinberg, over the years, has been a champion. We usually work with the Judiciary Committee. We've done a lot of work with them. I'm very excited about a bill that we are going to be raising, or they are going to be raising, that we're behind this year, that deals with gun industry accountability and victims' access to justice. But these are things that we're working on. As you know, our legislative sessions are either a short session from, I think, February to May, or a long session from January to June. We're constantly working on figuring out where we need to go next, what needs to happen, how do we keep people safe? It's just not, it's nonstop work. So that's one of the reasons that we're rated A.
Would you be able to do this work in Texas or Oklahoma or Nebraska?
We wouldn't get an A rating. There are wonderful organizations in Texas, for example, that work with what they have, but they have legislatures that constantly push back and don't pass any meaningful legislation. So we're very lucky in Connecticut. One of the things we do every election year is we put out ratings and endorsements for the people we either incumbent or challengers, as we did with the 2024 election. And we spent a lot of time with a questionnaire and with interviewing and speaking with and looking at people's legislative record. And we have, thousands and thousands of people who are part of our constituency and our database, and we let them know, they know that gun violence prevention is important to them. So they're going to look at those ratings, and that's going to really weigh into who they vote for.
Sure.
But I think those are all reasons.
Do you talk to counterparts across the country?
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't as much until I became interim ED, but I've had the opportunity. I mean, we do certainly at different times, but I've had more of an opportunity this year. And I think it's so important. And that's actually one of the great things about creating a state. So part of the legislation I was talking about that was passed over the past couple of years, where we were able to create this commission that I now serve on, which is the Commission on Community Gun Violence Intervention and Prevention, and create an office within the Department of Public Health, an office of it's called Firearm Injury Prevention, is that they are in touch with offices like that in states around the country and are speaking and are finding out best practices. And some of the work that was done by the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention really brought people together in a way in the last year and a half that hadn't happened. So I'm very thankful that they got the work done that they were able to before it's all going to get shut down. But yeah, I absolutely communicating and helping each other out is a big part of this. We work really closely with Giffords Law Center, and they are very helpful in helping us, sort of think about what legislation we might want to look at, and also helping us craft the legislation. Yeah.
Gun violence is a heavy topic, so let's talk about something lighter and Westport. What got you here? How long have you been here?
Gosh, I've been here for 22 years, but I grew up spending summers here. Oh. My parents always rented a place first on Wilcox Lane. It was Maurice and Mel Wagner's barn.
Okay, right off of South Compo.
Right off of South Compo, and this was like before anything was there. There were just fields around it, and it was this converted barn. It was really cool. And I mean, I think we started coming here when I was like 1. And then later on, they rented Morton Esther Coley's house out on Compo Mill Cove. Ah. Yeah. And there was no gate.
Okay.
So, I mean, like Westport was the coolest place in the world to me. That was just, I grew up in Manhattan, and my time spent here was absolutely my happiest time. So when we had a chance to move here, I sort of leapt at it.
And did being here full-time live up to your expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an incredible place to raise your children. It's an incredible community filled with just really interesting people. And when I moved here, I got involved. As I said, I think I've always been sort of an activist at heart. That's kind of my thing. But I got involved with various organizations and on the board of my kids' preschool. And then I got involved with the library. Oh. And I was on the board of the library, which I loved. I mean, this is the most incredible library in Connecticut, if not, the country.
Senator Blumenthal yesterday called it his favorite library in the state.
It's mine too. But anyway, so I was very involved with the library for a long time. And it was through my involvement in the library that I started going to RTM meetings and realizing, wait a minute, I love this. And that's when I ran for the RTM. And that's what it sort of got me involved in local government.
So you love sitting at meetings for hours listening to people talk?
I do. I mean, it is, maybe a little bit less now. It's, I've been doing this for a long, long time. It can get very frustrating. You can feel like you're hitting your head against the wall. And yet, everybody who's involved, whether you agree with them or not, care deeply you can tell I care deeply about this town. So I would hope, like you asked me in the beginning, do you evolve? I would hope that we all evolve as we engage over the many issues that we engage about in this town.
And third select woman.
Yeah.
Wasn't
my first choice.
No, you would have preferred to be first select
I would have
woman.
preferred to be first. I think I would have done a great job. But I enjoyed working. I enjoyed very much working with Jim Marpy. I enjoyed the work I was able to do.
What did you do? What does a third select woman do?
I mean, I think like a counterbalance, a counterweight. There were a couple of initiatives that I was involved in, but remember, a couple years into my tenure, the pandemic hit. And
Right.
so I became really focused on sort of wellness in the community and worked with with Elaine Dano and our human services department, and helped to create, there were a lot of people outside of town government who wanted to be helpful. Like a Westport Neighbors. I can't remember the name exactly of the initiative that we worked on, but it was connecting people to people who were alone and felt like they needed a phone call. And that felt really like it was what we needed to focus on. Because I think from the beginning, like from my involvement with the library, it's always been about, how do you build community? How do you make sure everybody in the community is represented and cared for?
So what is the difference between working at the sort of micro town local level and the macro statewide level?
That's a good question. I mean, I think you have to put the same amount of effort into each.
Do you see?
Yeah, I mean,
Is
I've
it
had
harder
more
to see
wins.
results at the?
It's harder to see results at this town level.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, since I've been involved with CAGV, we've passed a lot of really important laws. I sometimes, feel that at the town level, things take even longer than they do at the state level.
But at the local level, you can say, oh, that's the stop sign we finally got.
Sure. Like, I mean, I look at the sidewalks on Main Street. I'm like, yeah, I helped make that happen. There are certain things that I feel very proud of that I was involved with, and that are meaningful to this town. I think they're both important. I mean, what do they say? Like, I hate talking about it as politics, but like all politics is local. All government starts at the local level, right? All governing, all civics, all sort of taking care of each other starts here.
So you've been involved last question, you've been involved in this for decades.
It has become decades.
Are there more Melissa Kanes coming through the pipeline, both locally and at the state level?
Yes.
There are.
We have the most incredible state. We are small, but like CAGV, we are sort of punch way above our weight class. There is such an incredible community of people who are passionate activists for the things that they believe in and care about, especially when it comes to sort of civil liberties in this state. And there are so many passionate, I've loved watching who joins the RTM every couple of years. People keep moving to Westport and caring about it and wanting to make sure that it's, safe and comfortable and, a good place to live. So I feel like there's lots of me's.
So you got a safe and comfortable town, a safer and comfortable state, and just
and equitable. Yeah, the country's just the problem now.
Well, maybe you can go solve that.
I don't know about that. I'm going to keep trying right here in Connecticut.
That's all you can do.
Yeah.
Melissa Kane,
Okay.
Chair of Connecticut Against Gun Violence, former third select woman, town activist, state activist. Thanks for coming on 06880, the podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
You bet.